Welcome back to Narratives in Black. In part 2 of our conversation with the inspiring Arielle Gray, we'll dive deeper into her groundbreaking projects and the messages she's championing through her art. We'll explore her work on impactful initiatives like the Future Archive Project and the Combahee's Radical Call, and get a glimpse into the exciting new direction she's planning to take her creativity. Arielle shares how she balances personal storytelling with universal themes, her role in Black and LGBTQIA+ communities, and her vision for the future of her craft. If you're ready to be inspired and challenged by the brilliance of Arielle Gray, don't miss the second part of our conversation.
So we've talked about how you blend your personal experiences in with like what's happening in cultural narratives. Mm-hmm. We've discussed all that, but can we kind of touch upon, you know, as a journalist, how important it is to report on things accurately, but as we spoke about the Charles Stewart case, sometimes in journalism, when we don't have the full picture, that can have ramifications and consequences on public perception. What are your thoughts about that, and how can we, as the public, when we're consuming these stories, have a better way of coming to our own resolution?
I think it's really important. I'll start with the latter portion of that first. I think it's really important for people to get their news from multiple sources. So don't just go to one platform to get your news. Try to make sure that you're taking it in from public radio stations, maybe newspapers, but make sure that you're casting a wide net so that you're getting as much information as possible. In our society, the way that media works, there are a lot of news stations and newspapers that are owned by billionaires, where money, donors is very involved in how they operate their newsroom, even though they say that it doesn't, right? And we know this time and time again with the way that these newspapers, the way that their headlines position things like police brutality and how they describe Black men versus white men in these headlines, right? We saw it with Mike Brown. We're seeing it now with Palestine. A year ago, what were the headlines looking like? Minimizing the genocide, minimizing how many people were actually being killed by Israel, right? And so the media plays a huge role in public perception. And I think that's why there's been this big rise of a lot of independent media platforms that are seeking to really tell the truth as it is. And so it's extremely important as a journalist to not only make sure that things are accurate, but also, where are you getting your information as a journalist from? Are you just taking that press release from the police department, from the mayor's office, and reporting on that? Or are you actually digging deeper and talking to the people who are impacted? And I think that's where a lot of the work has to happen in the field, is really talking to people who are marginalized, who are not often covered in the news, or they are covered in the news, but only when it's convenient to the story. And so I think it's a big problem. And here in Boston, I do really want to uplift, certain places like the Bay State Banner that's been doing the work for decades, reporting on Black communities here.
Absolutely.
And it's really sad to me to see, nothing against, other news platforms. I work for one myself, but it's really kind of disappointing to see how a lot of these news platforms across the country are now getting these grants to build these teams that look at race and inequity. And a lot of cities like us have these small newspapers that have been doing that work for decades, and they are not getting that funding.
Yes.
So what are we really talking about when we're talking about media, And another thing to think about too, some of these news stations, it's like a monopoly.
Yes.
They're owned by the same companies. They're owned by the same people.
They're conglomerates.
Exactly, they're conglomerates, exactly. And that's why I do count myself a little bit lucky, because I do work at a public radio station where, the majority of our funding comes from listeners. So I don't feel as much of that, you know, like, I guess like war on my moral conscience. Not saying things are perfect with public radio stations, but there's a lot that needs to change with media. And
now it's social media popping
and now
up.
Now it's social media. Now a lot of people are getting their news from TikTok, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Right, and you know, places like the Washington Post are struggling to keep their readership up, but it's because people don't trust you.
Right.
You've lost the trust of the people, and I think that's why it's so important, particularly for reporters coming from marginalized communities. It's important for us to be represented in these newsrooms, but then also it's important for us to be given the power to change things. But as we know, a lot of times these systems are not built to change them from within because they don't want to change.
That part. And that's another thing that I wanted to kind of talk to you about as well, is like, how can we dismantle those inequities, if you will, those themes within these conglomerates. As most people know, I work for a really big news station as well, and I'm noticing, and I love working there. At the same time, I do find it is sometimes challenging to highlight people that look like me, to have representation around people that look like me. I don't have all of the answers or the solutions, but I keep trying to fight. And that's the thing that people don't see on the outside, is the internal struggles of being in those rooms and saying, no, we need to talk about this because this is what's important. And not only that, but this is the truth. How can we dismantle the conglomerates in a way where it's like, no, we need to be highlighting these types of stories and we need to represent these types of people in these communities. How have you done that?
You know, I just want to acknowledge and uplift what you just said, because I think it's really hard for a lot of us who do work for these larger organizations or institutions. Like, a lot of the programming and initiatives that you see geared towards us, you know, it started by us, the people who are in these places, right? It started because we really care and we really are invested. But to outside folks, it sometimes looks like, oh, this organization is just doing this initiative now to reach Black people or to reach brown people.
Pandering.
Exactly, pandering. And because they're not behind the scenes, they're not seeing all of the work that folks like you and I are putting into making sure that these initiatives happen. But then, you know, on the flip side, it's hard to think about changing these systems in these spaces, because I think the question is, do they actually want to change? Do they actually want to change? Are they actually invested in changing? And what we saw in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, a lot of these places started, you know, these DEI initiatives, these different programs, these different platforms to highlight Black and brown people. And now what we're seeing is the pendulum is swinging back. And a lot of those things are actually not being invested in the way that they were in 2020. A lot of these things have been dismantled or just, you know, they're gone now.
Absolutely.
And there's no longer this vested interest in highlighting stories from people of color. So that's where you kind of have to ask yourself, you know, do these places want to change? Are they going to actually change? And it may be the cynic in me, but I think, no, they don't. They don't. And so for us, being in these spaces, it's important for us to do the work that we love to do and to make space for our communities. But I think it's also important for us to acknowledge the fact that these organizations are not interested in fundamentally changing how they work. And yeah, and I think that's why it's really important that we build our own initiatives, our own coalitions, which we have been doing, you know, which you do, It's part of why I, really love running Print Ain't Dead, because that allows me another level of freedom to really talk about the issues that I want to talk about in my community, Again, I brought up Bay State Banner, and actually Yewu Miller, who used to be at the Banner, longtime reporter there, he's actually starting a new initiative that's focused on supporting reporters in newsrooms that are focused on highlighting communities of color, I think in like the greater Boston area.
That's
so
beautiful.
He's starting that initiative too. Yeah, which is, I'm really excited to see what happens with that. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different moving pieces to that.
Because it's hard. We talked
really
about the
hard.
proximity of whiteness, and I think sometimes what people don't see, especially outside folks, like you said, it's like, y'all don't see what's going on in the background. So sometimes when people ask me like, oh, well, you're here, are you siding with these folks?
With these folks, right.
And it's like, no, but yes, but no. Because I think that sometimes somebody has to be in the space in order to create some kind of change, And if I remove myself from that space, then how much of the work are they gonna actually do if somebody's not in there fighting for the work to be done?
And here's the thing. Even though we may not be able to, again, fundamentally change how these spaces and organizations and institutions work, the work that we're doing while we're there is still important and still necessary.
It's impactful, I feel
Exactly.
like. And it starts like you said, the pendulum, it starts it swinging back into the right direction.
Yeah.
I think it's important, but we do get, beat up a lot, and I use that loosely, but we do get beat up a lot, behind the scenes of the fact that we're fighting so much for the voices to be heard. We've talked a lot about the challenges, but you've also highlighted a lot of joy in your work. How important is that, and in what ways do you feel like that's important to, because we always hear Black joy, Black joy, Black joy. At the same time, yes, we can focus on the negative all we want, but we do need to focus on the love and the joy within our own communities. What are some stories that you can talk about that you felt like this was a perfect example of like Black joy and Black voice joy?
I will say that this project that I've been working on Alan Crite has been incredible. And basically for the project, I'll be producing stories on him next year. But I've been interviewing folks who worked with him, who were mentees of his. And this man was not a man who cared about fame. He did not care about making money from his art. He invited people into his home. He offered studio space to artists for free.
Love that.
In his house, the top floor of his house in the South End. And just hearing from all of these black artists now, a lot of them are older, in their 70s and 80s now, but hearing from them about how much they loved this man, about how much the community loved him, and how much he brought and impacted, how much he brought into and impacted their lives. It's brought a lot of joy for me doing this project and listening to their stories, because it's a reminder that no matter what kind of work you're doing, if you're building relationships with other people in your community, it's important and it makes a difference. And it may not be something that makes the front page of the news, but it's something that people are going to remember for the rest of their lives. And talking to these artists and hearing them recall these stories of Alan Crite, the times that he showed up to their exhibition at the Mattapan Library, where a lot of people didn't show up. Like, those stories bring me so much joy, because it's just a reminder that so much of our lives it's really defined by our relationships with other people and how much we're able to love them as well. And so I try to make sure that I remember that, and that I remember that joy and happiness, those things are not permanent, but that I need to appreciate and cherish the times that they are here in my life. So I would say, you know, joy is incredibly important, very, very important.
That's
yeah.
legacy too, to me,
Yeah.
in my eyes.
Yeah.
It's not about the fame or the money or the press releases or the notoriety. It's more so, how are you pushing the generation forward? Because that's your legacy. Most people attach legacy to money and how much you have in your account and how much you can sustain your future generations. But what does it look like to, you know, we interviewed Ife Franklin on this platform as well, and people like her I look at and I'm like, your legacy is so beautiful and so profound, because I look to you as someone who I'm like, if she can do it, I can do it. If she's gone through all of these challenges and in a completely different time that I came in, then that to me is her legacy. When she's giving us all of these gems and watering all of the youth that she works with to give them that inspiration spark to continue doing the work. It's people like that, to me,
Yes.
that's where your legacy continues. And I
Yes.
think Boston is doing a really good job of that. At the same time, I think we need to do more when it comes to highlighting people that live in this neighborhood. That's one of the reasons why I love the work that you do, because you're constantly out here trying to get stories from the people who still live here. A lot of the artists who have made really big impacts here, 9 times out of 10 leave.
Yep.
And also, you also named that they were 70 and 80 years old. I just wrote in a dissertation for this grant, since we were talking about grants, that, you know, when an elder passes away or transitions, a library burns down. All of that wisdom and all of that knowledge goes away with them. And I think it's important when we talk about local artists, that's exactly what we're talking about, getting those real life stories from them in their journey so that people can be inspired to continue on their journey.
Yep. And I think that it's so important. And, you know, one of the reasons why I did the Future Archive project, you know, Barbara Smith, one of the co-founders of the Combahee River Collective here in Boston, you know, she essentially said there's no guarantee that our lives, what we're doing, will be documented. There's no guarantee that these stories will be told in the future. And that's why we must document ourselves now. And so I see a lot of my journalism reporting work as not just highlighting stories, but it's adding to an archive so that 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, somebody can search an artist's name and this piece pops up on their work. And then going back to Alan Crite, you know, he gave so much of his work, all of it, so much of his papers, a lot of the things that he was writing, putting together, he shared that with his mentees. So a lot of them actually still have his stuff. One of his mentees, Susan Thompson, still has Crite's mother's clothes.
Wow.
And his mom, born in the 1800s, passed away in the 1970s. She still has her clothing. And she's kept it all this time since Crite passed away.
That's beautiful.
So they are the ones carrying his legacy. And one of the things I spoke to Janetta Tinker, who is a Boston artist who was one of Crite's mentees, you know, she was talking about the fact that when she passes, you know, she doesn't know what's going to happen to all of her stuff, all of her artwork and things like that. She's like, they're probably just going to throw it out. So you're right. When an elder dies, it is like a library is being burned down. So I think for a lot of us, and also part of what you guys are doing here with this is, okay, how do we ensure that library stays standing? And some of it is by just documenting their stories, their lives, what it is that they were doing, so that it is something that we can give to the next generation.
Archival work is not easy. When Amir and I were in the process of doing Black, narratives of the LGBTQIA, queer, and trans history, I didn't realize that JFK Library even had so much stuff. Or even the LGBTQIA History Project had so much stuff. Like, literally, somebody is documenting each year what is going on in the city and how it's being laid out.
Yep.
But archival work is like a lost treasure in a way. Like, most people don't want to do it. 1980 babies understand that we didn't have digital archives like we do now. And I think that's the beauty of like how our society is kind of shifting, where now we can be on digital platforms. However, the one thing that scares me is like, well, how are we going to be able to play it if technology is catching up and doing all of these advancements? Are we going to be able to play an SD disc in 100 years from now? Because as we've seen, as an 80s baby, cassettes, VHS, all of these things are kind of like old to us. So it's like when we're doing the digital archives, it's a beautiful thing, but I worry about what's going to happen later on when we can't play it back. And how do we do that? So I love the fact that you talked about the Future Archives Project and the Combahee Project as well. What are some future initiatives or projects that you are actually excited about? I know Print Ain't Dead is definitely solidified. I actually know from a couple of artists that I've spoke to that you are actually opening up space for them to do future projects. Mashire, you gonna kill me, but I said what I said.
Yep.
But what are some other things that you're really looking forward to doing?
Yeah, so Print Ain't Dead, obviously. We're actually, for the first time in a couple of years, we're printing.
And when you say we, it's not just you, it's also Sierra.
Yes, Sierra Peters, yes, who she's currently getting her MFA at Yale. So,
oh, wow,
yeah.
Go ahead, girl.
So, yeah. So she's, she's no longer in Boston. But we are, gearing up to publish a mushroom foraging zine written by a Black mushroom forager here in Boston.
Okay, because I'm like, girl, I know how you feel about them mushrooms, sis.
Yeah.
And foraging in general.
Yep, exactly.
You will pick stuff off of the street. Like, I have watched Arielle
from somebody's garden,
walking, like, and being like, this is that, girl, let me snip.
Take it home, whatever. So, so we're doing that. That's coming up at the end of October. And then, of course, this Alan Cripe project, which is a year-long project, so that won't be releasing until next October. And I'm actually working on this crazy story right now about this Black couple that owned a house on the Cape. And their house was actually condemned, but on the chimney of their house is this incredible painting. It was painted onto the chimney by Norman Lewis, who is like, again, one of the, y'all know who Norman Lewis is.
Yeah, I mean, yes.
Y'all know who
For
Norman
those who
Lewis
don't
is.
know, I'm gonna keep asking you to say that because there's people out there that don't know these people.
Right. Again, like Alan Cripe, they're actually kind of contemporaries in a way, but Norman Lewis was more of an expressionist abstract painter who's very well known and set the foundation for a lot of Black artists in the 20th century. And he came to Cape Cod and painted this work on this couple's chimney. And so now folks are working to preserve this chimney with this work on it. And it's just a wild
Why was the
story.
house deemed condemned?
It was abandoned for some years. Not abandoned, but after the couple passed away, it passed on to relatives, and the relatives weren't living here, and it was just difficult. A tree fell on the house, all this stuff happened, and it just ended up having to be condemned. But they saved this chimney of the house to preserve this artwork. And so that also includes a lot of archival work, because the woman who is working to save the chimney, she went through this house and saved a lot of documents, pictures, crazy stuff. So I'm going through that archival stuff too to figure out how we preserve that, but also trying to find out more of the story about the couple who owned the house, because the husband died, but then the wife died some years later in the 90s, and she died under suspicious circumstances. So yeah, just trying to do the research and figure out. So that's the stuff that I really love doing, is like mixing archival work, using the past to tell the story about our present. And so, yeah, those are some of the things that I'm working on right now.
We need to discuss living wills, right? Because those are also important. Some of the things that you're hitting on is, where does this stuff go? Like, you had named someone who has all of this stuff from Alan's mom. And it's like, well, what happens when I leave? It's like, these are the things that we should be talking about in the Black and brown communities that I don't feel like we do, because death is such a, for some people, it's a morbid thing to think about, right? But it can also be very devastating. Some of us don't have family that we can leave these things to. And we also don't know where to leave the things to. So it's like, when we're talking about living wills, it's like, these particular pieces, we need to be able to write somewhere where we want them to go to be preserved. That's been very heavily on my mind, especially on a day like today, where we're going to go celebrate life of someone who has passed on. I'm just thinking, well, what happens to all of his things?
Right, his notebooks,
his writings, his poetry, his collector items, things like that. And it's like, when I think about that in tandem, it makes me really sad, because we don't know. But I think, if we're saying anything today, one of the most important things, I think, is having a space to be able to donate your stuff. I know it's kind of daunting to think about, but we have ownership, and these artifacts that we have stories behind them. And so we need to preserve those.
Exactly.
And I think when we talk about archival work, people think of it as a very elitist white notion of like, oh, well, of course they have their, no, we have a story to tell too. And our future generations need to know not only our strength, our resiliency, but also our joy. With that being said, how do you envision your work evolving in the next few years, and what are some new themes and mediums you're interested in exploring? Because you do a lot.
I think one of the things I'm really interested in exploring through doing all of this work on Alan Crite and meeting these other artists in Boston who've been creating in Boston for decades, I think one of the things I really want to focus on in the next couple of years is documenting the history of particularly Black craft artists here in Boston, because there's a really long tradition and legacy of Black craft artists here in the city. And so figuring out, how do we document their stories in a way that's comprehensive and that shows that this was an ecosystem and is an ecosystem here.
Still is, yeah.
Still is, exactly. And I feel like that's kind of going to be perhaps one of my callings in the future, is to focus on that. But I'm not quite sure what the future holds as far as the other aspects of my work. I just really hope to continue uplifting and highlighting the stories of the people in my communities. And yeah, that's really all I really want to do, I think, at this moment, because I feel very honored to do it. And I feel lucky that people trust me enough to share their stories with me. And yeah, it's an honor. It's an honor to do this work.
We can feel the passion though, Arielle. Like, you have been doing this work from day one that I met you, and it's been really, really on your heart to ensure that you're saying the truth all the time. That's one thing that I admire a lot about you, is your integrity. You never allow it to be compromised, no matter what is going on around you, or even in the institutions that you sometimes have to work in.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I hope you realize the impact that you have. It's not just where you write and how you write, it's also what you're celebrating. And I see that, and you wear it on you. It's not on you, it's in you. And that's what I really love about it. You've been doing this work for so long, and I know that it gets exhausting. And I know, as you said earlier, you know, your own mental health. Just know, like, we see you and we appreciate you. and we value you. Your voice is so important to our culture, not just now, but for future generations. There are students that are looking up to you, there are elders that are looking up to you, and every time we talk about people who are really truly doing the work in the city, your name comes up a lot. So I'm not sure if you have had the chance to really take in the impact that you have had on Boston and beyond, because you have been featured everywhere. It hasn't just been here in the city.
Thank you for that. Yeah,
You're
It
welcome.
is hard to see sometimes. You know, it is hard, but it's always worth it. You know, it's always worth it, even if it's just one person who feels like I did a good job of sharing their story. You know.
Don't make me cry, because I've known you for so long and you've done amazing, amazing job. It isn't just one person.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That
I
means a
love you
lot.
for real.
I love you too.
Before we head out, to end off our interview today, take a moment to just tell our listeners an inspirational quote, affirmation, or something you have liked to hear when you were younger Ari.
I remember one of my art teachers, I think it was elementary school. This was a long time ago. And we talked about this. But I remember her telling me, you know, don't try to make things perfect. Just do it. Just get it out of your head. And that's really stuck with me throughout these years. There is value in just doing the thing. There's so much value in it, even though it may not amount to anything. And I think if we all kind of approached our creativity and our artistry in that way, I think it would be a lot easier for a lot of us to appreciate that also applies to our lives. That no matter what we produce, no matter what we do, our lives have value.
Absolutely.
And we are important. And yeah, I would say that.
This is a full circle moment for me. Just watching you, knowing the personal struggles that you have had, and still continue sometimes to go through. It's just a full circle moment. You have helped me grow in so many different ways. I remember when you were like, girl, you ain't got a website. Between the makers, between, the stories that you tell, like even the makers, I really wanted to go to the celebration that they had a couple nights ago, but to see that is still happening and how important it is, and the mediums that you all cover. I know it's a team of you all. Shout out to Amelia and Christella and everybody. But that's always been something that you have been like steadfast on, is highlighting people who don't necessarily get that attention and that should, because that changes the trajectory of how people see themselves, how people show up, and what kind of work that they want to start creating. And you have done that with me. I don't think you understand the impact that you have had, but I know it's not just me. So for me, this is a full circle moment, and that's why I was like, we need to get you on here, because your voice is so expansive and it resonates with so many of us. So I just want to say thank you again for being on today. From you interviewing me to me interviewing you, girl.
Right?
Girl, I'm over here like crying. I'm honored to call you sis. I'm honored to call you friend. I'm honored to call you family, because I know this is just the tip of what we're gonna see you come into fruition with. Your journey is so long and so expansive, and I'm so proud of you and just honored to be here witnessing this in real time, for real.
Thank you, Amanda.
You're welcome.
And thank you for having me. This has been a great
course.
conversation. And also to be able to see your growth and all the things that you've accomplished and all the things that you've dealt with
Thank you.
and had to endure. And you're still here. You're still doing all the things that you said that you wanted to do, right? And setting an example for your kids. It's been beautiful, very, very beautiful.
I love you.
I love you too, girl.
And that concludes our interview as I'm like in tears. For everybody at home, please stay tuned to everything that Arielle Gray has coming up. She is a trailblazer. You are a force. And we thank her so much for being on today. Thank you for being on Narratives in Black.
Thank you for having me.
Love you for real.
I love you too.